All right, so we are on Lamed Aleph Amud Beis 31b, and we're at the home stretch of chapter 5 of Sotah.
These guys must be sitting with 1,000 years of papers.
The people of the Talmud,
Yeah.
something of that nature, yeah.
Maybe 500 years to 1,000 years of papers.
Yep.
That's I just realized that, and that's why it's always you always hear this rabbi said the name of this rabbi, the name of this rabbi.
That's right. So it's funny to think about you saying that, because I often think about that when I learn Rambam. The daily study cycle of Rambam, and Rambam goes through every single mitzvah in the Torah and all its details. The amount of information you need to be able to, first of all, collect, remember, retain, and organize is staggering. And this is besides for his books on philosophy and his books on medicine. Like if someone, what?
And be a doctor.
Yeah, and be a doctor at the same time. If someone were to be an expert in one of the fields in which Rambam wrote, he would have been like someone of note. Oh, he's an expert in that field. And here you have a guy who's just an expert in everything. It's staggering the amount of information the man must have collected, retained, and organized, researched. I'll give you an example. Like he talks about some of a tangent.
Just talk about the moon.
Yeah.
The phases of the moon.
The phases of the moon, how to predict. To predict.
He didn't have a telescope.
Yeah. Another one is he writes about, in the Torah, there's like these gaps. Like when you get an Aliyah, you see these gaps in the text of Torah. Mm-hmm. It's precise where they are to go and how big and so on. So he puts a whole list of where the gaps should go. And he writes, I researched viewing Torahs in such location, such location, such location, and I see there's a bunch of mix-up. So after all my research, here's the correct spacing. If someone did that in his lifetime, good, he achieved something. Yeah. And this is like 2 chapters, what is it? In his work, it's staggering. It's really staggering. You're saying this about the stages of the Gemara, which is true. They sat here with texts and they didn't have books, but the manuscripts and information that they're sitting there and parsing over for days. And this is about modern medicine, where you're able to sit on the couch and hang out. And this is while their stomach is killing them, teeth are hurting them because they don't have modern dentists and all the rest of that. And they're still sitting there poring over these texts. It's mind-boggling. To think that humans.
Mind-boggling is that going back to the example you gave a couple of years ago, standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah, that's where we stand, right?
Okay, so
that's right.
Forget about the Rambam.
Right.
Take the Rabbi.
Right. Yeah.
Not only was an expert, because the Rambam never read Tanya, right?
Right. So exactly. So all of that work they have is not gone.
No.
It becomes the premise from which we start.
Right.
That's right. Yes.
So, and not only did the Rebbe study Torah, everybody says that whoever went into his office, he had all kinds of secular books on his desk as well.
You can go see them today. Yeah, absolutely.
So
it's mind-boggling.
That's even more mind-boggling, plus the thousands of people that he's seen and the tens of thousands of letters that he answered.
Yeah. So in some ways, there's the big parallel between the Rebbe, Alter Rebbe, and Rambam. And the vast knowledge of all fields of Torah and outside, their availability to the masses in a huge way. You can, in some ways, Ezra is another figure like that, who dealt with the Jews on a mass scale, fought to stop intermarriage, restored Torah in a global sense. There's very few characters in history that had that kind of global imprint in shaping Jewish life and Jewish thinking on a spiritual level, on a theological level, on a sociological level. Very few leaders in history ever had that.
On an academic level.
I'm sorry, on an academic and a sociological, not just academic.
Non-rabbinical academic level.
Oh, in that regard also, yeah.
And on top of it, he had the time to walk home every afternoon to have tea with his wife.
Yeah, and when his mother was alive, every day with his mother too. Talmud Sotah also has that kind of
19 years old, 18 years old.
Talmud Sotah also had that kind of global impact, where he was also writing in both the revealed part of Torah, the esoteric part of Torah, philosophy, as well as going off to Moscow to fight and deal with decrees that the czars are imposing. So Talmud Sotah was also that kind of figure that had this kind of global reach on all levels.
You know what kind of a trip it is to go to Moscow from where they were?
From Lubavitch, yeah. And then do writing and teaching on the way. I mean, anyway, people live in a different plane. Okay. So with that introduction, where are we? So far we have 2 alternative ways of understanding the Mishnah. And the Mishnah essentially speaks of the veracity of one witness coming and telling us that he's sought intimacy, and let's call it off the law. The special dispensation here that Torah says we believe there's one witness. So one way of understanding that is, well, if Torah says we believe this one witness, he's now given the status of two. Because Torah says we believe this one in this circumstance. Thus, however we ordinarily treat two witnesses, which is the general Torah prescribed mode of establishing a testimony, we give all of that power to that one single individual, because Torah says we believe him in this circumstance because of the history of the couple and because we know they were secluded and because of all the rest of it. So we give him that full strength as if he was two witnesses. And therefore, when he speaks, after he's been established by the court as having been believed after cross-examination and so on, we discussed that a little bit yesterday, then 100 people come and contradict him, it's of no value. Because Torah says we believe this guy. We treat him like he's two witnesses. And just as when it comes to two against 100 is equal 50-50, so is the one against 100 50-50, because in this instance, we gave the one the full power. So given that, we have to re-understand the Mishnah in some way. We gave two options as to how to re-understand the Mishnah. Do we rephrase that word? Do we change the word here to say he doesn't drink and so on? But that's the basic understanding. That was one way of thinking. The other way of thinking was introduced to us by Rabbi Nechemiah, which is, on the contrary, when Torah says that one witness is believed, what Torah is telling you is drop the ordinary standard of testimony. So ordinarily, the standard of testimony is two. And two becomes fully believed, equal to 100 people. That's the ordinary standard of testimony. But because Torah says here, now believe one, that means Torah is saying this set of laws, i.e. the law of the Sotah, disregard the ordinary circumstance, the ordinary structure of testimony, and therefore go by the majority opinion, whether it's women speaking, whether it's slaves speaking, whether it's a single person speaking. Because the ordinary testimonial structure, Torah is saying it doesn't apply here. So it's exactly the opposite. In the first thinking, we said, no, the Torah standard of testimony applies here, which is raising the status of the one guy into that category. Now we're saying, well, if Torah says one guy's believed, no, drop the whole structure. And therefore, if you have 100 women against one woman or against one guy, so go with 100 women, because they're the majority. And then therefore, when the Mishnah discusses 2 against 1 or 1 against 2, it's not talking about kosher witnesses that have the whole weight of testimonial law. It's talking about, quote, invalid witnesses under ordinary circumstances, who are now being given to believe because Torah says we don't have to apply the full standard. And therefore, go with the majority, whether it happens to be 2 women against 1 woman or 5 women against 1 guy or whatever the circumstances. So that was one way. That was the second way of understanding the Mishnah. And now today the Gemara is going to introduce a third method, and the third method is going to be kind of hybrid in some ways. Yeah.
To get off the track just for a second.
Yeah.
When the woman is fighting right to the very end, she has to drink the soda water,
Yeah.
and she dies of it.
Mm.
Right? She deserved it.
Mm.
Right? But how come if 2 men are in bed together, they have to get stoned?
I can't answer why Hashem decides to punish each person in that way. I can't tell you. I can't say. I mean, we can think about it and theorize about it, but I don't have that kind of authority, right? Unless I see it written somewhere, then we can maybe discuss it. I don't know. You'd have to make some principle as to what's the universal rule. Why does Torah sometimes say death by stoning, sometimes by hanging, not by hanging, by strangulation, by burning, or by the sword? And why? That's the burning, right? It's a clever way of burning that the person dies instantaneously. That's the idea. So death is painless, or as painless as possible. It's as quick as possible, let's put it that way. So you have to make some sort of principle as to why Torah applies this punishment to this set of behaviors and that punishment, which I don't think I know off. I couldn't think of something like that offhand. Anyway, okay, so let's see the third interpretation. Third to last line of the page, Lamed Aleph on my base, 32b, the last word. The Ikadamri, there are those who suggest the following. Let's re-understand Rabbi Nechemiah, which is, Kol heicha da'asaid echad kasher me'ikara, anytime the first witness to arrive is a kosher witness, but he's a single person, and tells us, that's the way Rashi explains the Gemara for us, and tells us, I saw intimacy, if he's the first one to come. So the first guy to arrive is someone who ordinarily would be a kosher witness, but he happens to be one person, so he's not two. But if he were to parse with someone else, as a person of status, he is a kosher witness. He's not a slave. He's not a relative. He's not someone who is known to take Torah lightly. Whatever the requirements are for a kosher witness, he fits the bill, and he's the first one to arrive. Right? Then, and we cross-examine him. Then he says we saw intimacy. Then he's treated like two. Right? So then, afilu meya noshim. So even if 100 women come and deny what he said, so he says, I saw intimacy, cross-examine him, we give him the veracity of two witnesses. 100 women come and say, no, it's not true, we were there, nothing happened. So nami ke'ed echad, they all are treated as if they're just one single witness against the first guy who was counted as two, and therefore disregarded. Because if he comes first, and he is established as a witness, he's given the full status of two. But top of Lamed Beis Madalav, top of 32b, but here in our Mishnah, where we said that one witness against two, she still goes along to drink, right? So this is what's going on. If the woman came first. In other words, like this, there's a hybrid going on here, which is like this, right? So we give the two options before, which is one is, Torah says one person's believed, he's given the status of two. Option B, Torah says one person's believed, so drop the whole standard. Now it's a hybrid, and we're saying it depends who comes first. If the first person to arrive is a kosher witness, and he's cross-examined, even if he's a single person, given the status of two. And if no matter how many come afterwards, we have established two witnesses as per Torah's description of what witnesses, what testimony is supposed to be. But if the person who comes first is not a kosher witness, and that's the first person who we cross-examine and decide is true, then by what weight are we giving this first person the truth? If it's a woman, let's say, because she's not an ordinary witness, or someone who's a slave. So now, because the first person to arrive is not a kosher witness, Torah says, okay, the standard of two witnesses is off. And then we have to go by the majority. So it's a hybrid. Depending on who comes first, that's how we're going to go about it. If the first person to come as a single witness is kosher, give him the strength of two. If the first person to come as someone who to begin with is not a kosher witness, then we have to go by the majority. And thus, there's a hybrid in the reading of the Mishnah. And therefore, says the Gemara of a Tirza, and here's how we'll have to understand Rabbi Nechemiah's teaching. Tirza, Rabbi Nechemiah Hachi. Here's how we're going to have to understand Rabbi Nechemiah's teaching if we're going to create this hybrid.
What makes this guy a non-kosher witness?
There's 1,000 things that can make someone a non-kosher witness. For example, someone who's a gambler for a living, non-kosher witness. It's we should make this clear actually. When Torah says a witness or not a witness, it's not about does Torah trust this person or not trust this person. It's like a legal rubric. It's like the same way we said before about if two witnesses come and say something and 100 say the other way. Logic dictates 100 people are more true than two. But in the legal rubric of what testimony is, they are equal by Torah law, right? So the legal rubric of what constitutes a witness that can make the two witnesses has a whole bunch of rules, including it's got to be male, it's got to be an adult male, it has to be someone who's Shomer Shabbos and Shomer certain mitzvahs, and if the person's a gambler for a living, then no. If the person owns if the guy's a shepherd, then no, because we assume that the shepherd lets his sheep graze in other people's yards. All kinds of.
Our patriarchs were shepherds.
Yeah, but that's the halacha.
So
Yeah. Maybe they have a reputation for putting muzzles on, right? This is about Avram Avinu.
Yeah.
The difference between his sheep and Lot's sheep. Avram had a reputation for keeping muzzles on his sheep, whereas Lot didn't. Right. So maybe if the shepherd has a muzzle, then we know not. I'm just pointing out that the definition of kosher witness versus not kosher witness is not an indication of the value the Torah places on that person. It's not as if somehow men are less capable of lying than women. Nothing to do. It has to do with the legal rubric. In fact, Rambam writes this explicitly with respect to family members. Witnesses can't be related, not to each other and not to any of the parties involved. Sorry? Right. So Rambam says, don't think the reason is because of bias. It's not the reason. Because even if we were to cross-examine this family member, and the family member is actually testifying against his family member, and we know this family member loves his family member, and yet he's still going against his family member, which means we have lots of reasons to believe. And in a secular court, that actually might be admitted. In a secular court, they would say, well, considering the cross-examination of the two lawyers, we can see that this brother is saying the truth, and we see the brother loves his brother, but he's trying not to lie, and therefore he's saying this. Torah law says no. You don't fit the legal rubric of what a kosher witness is. So sorry. That's what Rambam says. Don't make the mistake of thinking that the relatives are not kosher because they're biased. Not true. Nothing to do with bias. It has to do with Torah saying this is the legal rubric of what a kosher witness is. The rules, nothing to do with bias or whether Torah says they're valuable or not. Nothing to do.
French say, the law is the law.
Yeah. So again, we have this hybrid. If the first person to arrive is a kosher witness by this legal standard, then cross-examined, accepted as kosher witness, and is given the status of two, and therefore other people will come afterwards, whatever they are, they're against two. So if it's 100 women, it's 100 women against two. If, however, the person who comes first is not a kosher witness, so then we kind of drop the standard of witnesses because Torah gives us the way out. And now we go by the majority. Because the first person to arrive wasn't a kosher witness. It was a woman, let's say, or a slave, or whatever the reason is. So this is the hybrid we have here, depending on who comes first, basically. So given that, we'll have to re-understand Rabbi Nechemiah's statement in the following manner. Namely, it's a little bit of a rephrasing of a statement we read yesterday by Rabbi Nechemiah, but now being re-understood in this new hybrid. It should be like this. Whenever the Torah gives believability to one witness, halach acharov, go after the majority. Acharov deis, go after the majority. Now, yesterday we understood that to mean, well, because Torah is believing one witness, drop the standard and go by the majority. Now we're saying, no. The next statement should be read as an interpretation of this previous statement. When is it that I drop the standard and go by the majority? Is only when it's two women against one woman, like one man against two men. In other words, the first person to arrive was a woman, was not a kosher witness in the legal rubric of kosher witnesses, and therefore we're dropping the standard. So yesterday we understood it as two different statements. One statement is Torah believes one witness and therefore drop the standard, with statement A, and statement B is that if it's one woman against two, then you go by the majority. If it's two men against one, go by the majority. And now we'll only know. The second statement is an interpretation of the first. When is it that you drop the standard of witnesses? Only when the first person to arrive is a woman. And then you treat one woman against two like you would two men against one. So the second statement is an interpretation of the first. Classifying when is it that we drop the standard? You're making this hybrid. That if a kosher witness was to arrive first, then we don't drop the standard. And we give that kosher witness the status of two, even though he's single. Right? So aval bat, shtei noshim b'ish echad. If you have two women and one man, then ki palga, it's like 50-50. Right? Because the second guy is a kosher witness. Let's see in Rashi. If they both come as one, so you have two non-kosher, one kosher. So we remain in doubt. If they come one after the other, right? Then if the guy who's kosher witness comes first, right? So then he's given the veracity of two women, nothing. But if the two women come first and the kosher witness comes after, right? Then it's like one witness about one witness canceling each other out because they're both equally non-kosher. Okay, this is how Rashi explains it for us.
Sorry, the second one was, you said, was kosher. Two women.
Right, but because he came second, he doesn't get that special status of two.
Right.
So it's like just two sets of non-kosher witnesses canceling each other out.
Two sets, got it.
Right, as opposed to
Got it.
the single guy getting a fully kosher witness, or a fully single testimony of double. Yeah.
What if she's intimate with another woman? That change the whole thing.
Not in the case of the Sotah. There's no Sotah law applied to that. Homosexuality between women is a different story. It's not a biblical prohibition. It's a rabbinic one. Because there's no insertion.
2 men is biblical.
Yeah, it's biological. Because when it comes to two males, there's just penetration of the sexual organs. When it comes to two females, there is no. So it's a rabbinic prohibition, but it doesn't have the same weight as. I don't want people listening to get the wrong idea that Torah is giving the okay for that kind of behavior. In fact, Torah has very strong words to say about it, but it's not the same class. It's not in the same legal rubric, considering the lack of penetration. Anyway, so now the question becomes, concluding this chapter, so if this is the case, why does the Mishnah repeat itself, right? The Mishnah at the end gave two cases of 2 against 1, where it's 2 that say intimacy, 1 that says no intimacy, or 2 that say no intimacy, 1 that say yes intimacy. If, as we just finished saying, the logic here is that they're all non-kosher witnesses, and so long as a non-kosher witness came first, go by the majority, then what's the difference which direction the majority is? And why repeat yourself in the Mishnah? Whether the majority is saying yes intimacy, whether the majority is saying no intimacy. If the first witness is non-kosher, go by the majority, as per the Menachemia's hybrid we just described. So why give 2 scenarios? One case in which the majority said not intimate, and one case in which the majority said yes intimate. What's the difference? If the first witness is not kosher, go by the majority opinion, and that's it. By the majority of witnesses. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, if you
Hold on, one second.
witnesses
Yeah.
come first
Yeah.
and say one thing,
Yeah.
the second witness that comes is a kosher witness,
A single guy.
single guy.
Yeah.
Comes and says otherwise.
Yeah.
You're still going by the majority? Because
Well, here in this case, you
kosher-
have 2 kosher witnesses. The event is established. right.
2 witnesses that come forward that are not kosher witnesses.
Not kosher witnesses. Okay. Yes.
And they come first.
Yes.
And they say.
So now we're quote unquote dropping the standard anymore. We're dropping the standard. Right. And then a single kosher witness comes afterwards.
Yeah.
We treat it as 50-50 because there's 2 sets of non-kosher witnesses that cancel each other out. And thus we're back to square one, in which we don't know what happened behind closed doors, and the cycle law goes on.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. Okay. So now the question becomes again, so if, as we just established, if the first witness to arrive is not a kosher witness, we go by the majority view of however many people come forward to testify as to what's happening. So why does the Mishnah have to repeat that same law twice? One saying the majority is yes intimacy, one saying the majority is no intimacy. The same principle applies. Follow the majority when the first witness is not kosher. If the first witness is kosher, then you go by the standard of 2 witnesses and we give them the whole believability and so on and so forth. But because the first witness wasn't kosher, that's the way we're understanding the Mishnah, follow the majority, then what's the difference which direction the majority is, whether the majority says intimate or the majority says non-intimate? Why does the Mishnah have to repeat both scenarios? Answers the Gemara, yeah.
What's that their definition of intimate? Because I was told.
The definition of intimate is full penetration. Well, actually not. It could be even the
Just lying together.
initial insertion. It's called.
Just lying together side by side. Close.
No, there has to be some. We discussed this way earlier. If genital contact is enough, or does it have to be the beginning of penetration or full penetration? We discussed this way earlier. But at the very minimum, there, if I remember correctly, is at least the genital contact. At least that. Remember, we talked about this way earlier. To go back there, with different opinions. But if I'm not mistaken, that's the bare minimum. Okay, so says the Gemara like this: Ma'al Yatema, had the Mishnah not said both scenarios, both the case where the majority says yes intimate, and the case where the majority says no intimacy, is because had the Mishnah not said both cases, I would have thought that kiyas then basar days. When do I follow the majority? L'chumra, when the majority leads us to be more stringent, namely, only if the majority says, right? Only if the majority says that ends up saying she should drink. The stringency here is actually that she's not intimate. That's the stringency, because that would mean the cycle has to go on and she has to drink. So I would have thought, had the Mishnah only given one scenario, I would have thought, well, you know what? You know when I take this leniency and go by majority? Is if the result is going to be that we're more strict, as a result and make her drink the water. Avalakula. But if the conclusion of the testimony of this leniency of following the majority opinion is going to lead to a leniency where she's not going to drink, perhaps loyal, maybe I don't follow the majority. And therefore, Kamash Malan, therefore the Mishnah got to tell us both scenarios to say that no matter what, considering that the first witness wasn't of a kosher nature, we always follow the majority.
Intimate is not really the right word.
Okay, so the technical word the Gemara uses is defiled. That's a technical word the Gemara uses. I keep on using the word intimate, but you're right, the technical word is defiled by whatever definition that is. You're right. In English, I don't know what intimacy.
Two people lying, a man and a woman lying in bed together without clothes on, that's intimate.
Right. Okay. So again, right. But on the other hand, someone could say, well, the act of intimacy is only full penetration, right? So it's hard to say in English what the definition is. But the Gemara's language is nitmas, she's defiled. And the Gemara discussed earlier what the definition is. Okay. Now, Hadin alach mishakine, this concludes chapter 5 of the Law of Sotah. God willing, tomorrow we'll begin chapter 6. And chapter 6 is going to be a little tangential. How do I pronounce that?
Tangent.
Yeah, that's it.
Tangent.
Tangential. It's going to be a little tangential.
Tangential.
Tangential. It's going to be a little bit like that, which is always fun because the Gemara is going to open up to all kinds of discussions, some of which aren't halachic in nature, some of them are more in like the inspiration level or historical level, things like that. Because what we're going to be doing is the Mishnah is going to go through beginning with the Sotah law, right? Because at the Sotah, one of the last stages in the procedure is the Kohen has to read to the woman what's going to happen to her if she is guilty and if she's innocent, and she has to respond saying Amen. Right? So the Torah gives a text, and the Kohen shall say, quote. So does it have to be in English? Does it have to be in Hebrew, as the actual text the Torah says, or can I do it in English so that she understands? And then from there, the Gemara is going to go to a whole bunch of other mitzvahs in the Torah, where the Torah says, thou shalt say the following: prayer, blessing, Shema, vows. There's all kinds of mitzvahs where the Torah says, say the following, and the Mishnah is going to go through. When is it that when Torah says to say, it means say it in the manner you understand it, in whatever language? And when is it the Torah says, no, say these exact words in Hebrew? So that's going to become the tangent the Gemara is going to go off on, because the Gemara is going to compare it to the curses and blessings that Moshe Rabbeinu gave at the two mountains, in the language which he used there, and the language in which the Torah uses to describe that event. And that's going to become the base from which we're going to compare it to other laws as to when you say it in the actual Lashon HaKodesh and when you can say it in English. So it's going to take us some interesting tangents. Okay, well, you didn't have a wonderful day. So tomorrow starts a new section. So if till now it was a little bit confusing, it's a fresh start tomorrow.
Interesting, as a corollary, in civil law,
Yeah.
the only way to accelerate a divorce, because there's like a 9-month period between when it's granted and when it's finally certified, is through if the woman defiles the relationship.
Proof of infidelity.
Yeah. So
Interesting.
So most people don't care. I mean, fine, the document will come when it comes. But if you really want to finish it, that's
Interesting.
And the person must admit to it.
Right. So I guess the Sotah law serves as God doing the admission. I suppose. That's interesting.
Interesting, yeah.
Was English language in those days?